Can you see the stream now?
No, let me reload here. It's not popping up for me, but that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm pretty sure last time it popped right up when you started it. But if it says that we're streaming on your end, then, I mean, we're probably good to go. I mean, I'll just wait to get some sort of notification or something.
Okay. All right.
Okay, well, I guess we're going to get to it then. So, I've already stated this once, but I don't think anybody heard it the first time. This stream is going to be dedicated to discussing criminality in an RBE and also how to organize our society and economies in order to optimize our standards of living within an RBE system. Or I should say, in our path, or on our path to attaining an RBE.
Mm-hmm. So this is our second live stream. You can go check out our last one, which it was a practice run, to be perfectly honest. But
yes.
we got through it, and it was probably a little longer than this one's going to be, but because we were just very long-winded. We drifted onto lots and lots of different topics and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so we'll try to keep this one as much as we can on topic, and in that spirit, I say we jump right into discussing criminality in the RBE. So, I say we put everyone that doesn't follow my rules to death. And honestly, that's what I imagine an RBE to be.
Holodomor just reenacted,
It's easy to have an abundance of resources on Earth when you're the only human alive. You know what I'm saying? It's just... I'm just trying to be practical here. No, so... to be serious, though, so criminality really is... There are causes of criminality, and there are ways of perceiving criminality and the ways in which we react to it, which fundamentally affect the way that we can organize our system and our society and our culture itself. So a lot of people don't realize that we live in a world in which there's actually a term to describe the type of justice system we have. It's called retributive justice. And essentially, the thinking is that if you commit some sort of crime, if you transgress upon someone's rights, you then pay some sort of penalty. That may be you get locked up, you have to wear an ankle bracelet, you are no longer able to participate in certain types of social events like voting and whatnot. And ultimately, our prison systems are supposed to be focused on rehabilitation. That's supposed to be the end result of imprisoning someone, is to get them to stop doing the behavior that got them in trouble in the first place. As I said, this is all called retributive justice. And the RBE, at least my conception of it, is a departure from using retributive justice towards a form of distributive justice, in which we look at the systemic causes of types of crime. We go to the root source and we ameliorate those causes. Meaning, if people are stealing because they're critically poor and they're going hungry, you provide food, which immediately removes that cause of crime. So instead of treating the effects of of these deprivations or whatever causes are allowing this to happen. Instead of that, instead of punishing individuals, you go and you resolve it where it originates, so that you fundamentally change the game a little bit to make things more equitable and to reduce the overall level of crime in a society. And now that's kind of a simple summation of the process, but there are going to be many rippling effects of switching from retributive justice to distributive justice. And I think that that is one of the things that we should focus on today in discussing this topic.
Yes, I agree. I always thought of a future justice system as what I would call resolutive justice.
Okay, interesting.
Instead of having laws per se, we would, as you say, we would look at the root causes of these behaviors and the contradictions between certain groups of people that can arise, and we will aim to ameliorate these problems through a variety of approaches and solutions, mm-hmm. rather than enforcing laws upon people.
Are there any real-world examples which helped you in forming this perspective on criminality?
Because I always look at, if you look at different behaviors, no one, and different types of what we call crime today, there is there's always a root cause or motivation for this behavior. Like no one, say, just use extreme example, no one just goes and kills someone just like senselessly. No matter how insane someone is, there's always even if it's there's always a slight motive behind it. We have to holistically across all these types of behaviors, mm-hmm. we have to examine them in depth, and we have to be mature and be able to talk about these issues, and we have to get down to we have to pick apart everything and get down to the root cause, and then instead of enforcing law, provide a solutions-based approach where an almost kind of a medical approach to society, where society has this problem, this crime, this what do you call this? What do you call disease? That's a bit strong. This social ailment that mm-hmm. We need to find a solution for.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, I think that's absolutely correct. I want to return to something that you mentioned before, which is there's virtually never, statistically, there's never any instance where somebody just for absolutely no reason goes out and begins slaughtering people. You don't have a 42-year-old father, for instance, one day rationally decide to walk out and begin murdering people. Like maybe he has a tumor or a growth or something changes. There's a cause to it. And so in that sense, the issue is a health or a mental health issue. And the same with psychopaths and sociopaths, right? Individuals who have brains that are structured slightly or dramatically different than the average person in a population. They exhibit certain qualities that we can pick up on if we're an observant society and deal with at the root cause, which is recognizing that they have a health condition and ensuring that we give them some sort of experience or take certain measures to protect other people from them. In the case of some psychopaths, there unfortunately is almost nothing you can do to change their behavior, because some of them are unfortunately very disturbed. But just how some people are born with other physical ailments, people can be born with these mental ailments. So there's still a root cause, and waiting for somebody to commit a crime first and then punishing them as individuals, instead of asking our society, well, how do we recognize and identify sociopaths and psychopaths, and then how do we treat them in order to protect everyone, including those individuals who have this unfortunate condition. So yeah, I think that that's a really great point that you made.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of there's a lot of different ways of dealing with this issue. I mean, you can have a karma type system, I guess, where or a restorative type system where if someone does something bad, they have to redeem themselves by repairing the damage they've done. Or you have just straight up rehabilitation, like what happens in Norway. Or you can have some forms of ostracism where people won't interact with you as much, or where it's decided that the best place for you is a secure location where you can live a normal life, but you're protected for your own safety and for the safety of others.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if we had this more equitable and more systemic oriented sort of justice system, I mean, what kind of changes would we see in our society? Like, what kind of systemic solutions do you think that we should implement today in order to bring us closer to very low or no crime in society?
Well, first things first, just address the obvious one. Decriminalize all controlled substances. That it's obvious, and then just allow people to produce the less harmful ones, and then if for more harmful substances, attempt through various means just to try to attempt to phase them out gradually.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And also resolving things like poverty or certain forms of discrimination or deprivation that would also pretty immediately cause a great reduction in crime, I would imagine. So, yeah, there are some big steps that we can take. I think, especially in the Western world, people tend to presume that people are naturally criminal or naturally evil, and that people are going to commit these crimes. There's nothing you can do about it. You just try to dissuade people from doing such things in the future. And that's kind of been this common sense, so-called common sense logic that's been really ingrained in our society for, at this point, possibly centuries or even up to millennia, I think. So we really do have to address how people consider how crime originates and the things that we can do in order to reduce it. I'm constantly surprised. If I could just share an example, I'm constantly surprised by how, in particular, people approach the topic of homelessness, right? Because a lot of homeless people tend to be also at the same time breaking some law, and that could be because they're simply taking up shop on a street somewhere, and that's not legal, or they could be stealing things because they're desperate. And I've actually talked to a couple people who have said that we should, at least in the short term, jail them all, because then at least they're getting access to basic services like a place to sleep and food, right? And
When
it's interesting to me, yeah.
you know your society's messed up when jail is better than like prison is better than being on the street.
Yeah, and it also says something that instead of trying to solve the issue of how people become completely impoverished and end up on the street, instead of addressing mental illness or any of those things, a lot of people's first like gut instinct is to just jail people, to deal with them as if there's some sort of inevitable obstacle that just needs to be gotten out of their line of sight. Because yeah, I, a lot of people don't know this, but it's actually cheaper to house every homeless person and to provide them basic social services than it is to allow them to sit on the street, because cops have to spend an inordinate amount of time taking care of homeless people, because they can steal things, they can cause property damage, they can disrupt people's daily routines, and that causes inefficiencies in the system. So a lot of people don't really consider that maybe just reacting to criminality, as you know, I don't think homeless people are criminals, I'll clarify, but that's the way that we treat them, right? So instead of reacting to criminality, a lot of people don't realize that we should probably just be taking those proactive steps to obviate those origins. And I keep on saying that, but that's something that really needs to be drilled home, because the RBE is really about establishing, as you've been talking about on your channel recently, it's about establishing community. And maybe we could go into what that is a little bit and just discuss why that's so important.
Yes. Um. Yeah, we will talk about that.
So it's interesting. I feel like when it comes to crime and criminality, what do you think of the argument that punishing people is some sort of emotional relief for victims of crimes or the surviving members of their families? Like, have you heard that argument before? Well, people will say, well, maybe it's not going to change anything to put this man to death for raping my daughter, but I will feel better, right?
Yeah, I've heard this argument, and you know, you see all over social media and stuff like that. You know, it's when you see some breaking news article about some person who's committed some horrific act, you just go into the comment section. It's just like, oh, like calling for like this person's death, or like you see a lot of angry reactions and all that kind of stuff, and that's kind of okay. I get it. They did the bad thing, but you know, they're still human, and getting angry about this isn't going to change anything. You know, what we should be doing is assessing this situation and looking at its root cause.
Yeah, and so I guess in saying that, do you think that it would be fair to say that we're rejecting the philosophy of an eye for an eye?
As proponents, yeah, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I and once again, because I feel like an eye for an eye, just that phrase, it's the perfect summation of what retributive justice is, right? If somebody deals pain to you, you deal pain back to them. And instead, we're advocating something more in line with perhaps some of the teachings of Jesus Christ, which is turn the other cheek. Or in our case, it isn't just turn the other cheek. It's maybe take the strike and then look at how you can completely resolve the issue that causes that person to strike you in the first place, so it doesn't just happen, or so it doesn't happen to you again, but also so it doesn't happen to everybody else around you. Yeah. So that was kind of a word salad, but there it is.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah. It's funny how, yeah, even though, well, I assume we're both atheists, you know, religious figures can be used a lot of the time to represent our beliefs, even though not a lot of people of that religion follow the teachings of the people in their text.
Yeah. Well, I think that unlike a lot of atheists who would rather just throw, you know, the Bible away completely, I think that as a historical book or piece of art, because that's really what I think it is, I think that it has some value. Now, of course, I think we should be aware that it came from a more primitive time, a less aware time, and that you shouldn't take everything in it seriously, obviously. But I do think that we can look at it and recognize our path moving forward and use it to inform our future actions. I don't think, you know, it's kind of like that argument that some people make that you can't separate the artist from the art, right? Like music, like if somebody beats someone, like their significant other, but they're also a musician, some people would boycott them and not listen to their music anymore. And honestly, I don't think that I agree with that. I don't think that you should maybe purchase that person's album. Maybe we shouldn't reward that person and allow them to continue doing those sorts of actions. But I don't think that that means that you can't enjoy that piece of art, because in my mind, you know, they probably weren't beating somebody as they recorded that music. You know, like that moment wasn't itself the problem. So anyways,
Well,
that maybe is a tangent.
That kind of reminds me of, you know, not just, you know, behavioral crimes, but just it reminds me of things like meat consumption as like not as like an ecological crime. Some would consider it as. It was like, you know, like people, even though, you know, I'd love to have, you know, either a vegan or a sustainable meat society. You know, it for now it is what it is, and I'll continue eating meat until there's, you know, until that there is a sufficiently, you know, good alternative.
Yeah, and I think there is, but right now it can be more expensive, right? Like if you're eating like high quality steaks, then, you know, it's probably cheaper to switch to some of these substitutes. Like they have some really good, actually, like soy sausages and stuff like that. Like I don't know if you've tried some of the new generation of soy meats, but they're actually pretty darn tasty. And no animal cruelty there, you know. So I mean, I think that there's alternatives. I also don't think that eating meat is necessarily itself an immoral act. I think that the industries that prop up our current consumption of meat definitely are, at the very least, amoral, and that we should perhaps eat less meat and demand more ethical treatment of the animals, you know.
Yeah.
And I say that because, you know, something like a cow or a chicken or something doesn't live an incredible amount of time anyways. So cutting their life short by an amount of time you might be able to see as some sort of trade-off for giving them free range on some really great land and protecting them and affording them a lifestyle that otherwise they wouldn't have had access to in the wild. Now, I get that is a little convoluted of an argument because cows are very altered. You know, they're genetically modified organisms. We've selected them to be very docile and fat. And maybe some people would think that that action in and of itself is immoral, but I don't think so. I grew up in Alaska. I hunted along with many of my family members for much of the food that we ate. There was respect, you know, there was not taking more than you needed, not taking so much that you would potentially damage the population. And there was, of course, you know, making sure that nothing went to waste. You know, even bones and stuff sometimes had use. So I think it's all, once again, in the way that we approach the matter. Now, actually, if we can go on a tangent, I would love to discuss why humans, like why our entire existence is kind of strange, because we are inherently violent, right? We eat stuff in order to survive. That's just the name of the game, right? We live on a planet and organisms consume other organisms in order to survive. And I've always thought that that's such an amazing thing, because obviously so much of how our society is organized is because of threats of violence and because of the fact that people need to eat. And it's really fascinating to me, like when I think about transhumanism and getting beyond the need to actually consume other organisms in order to survive. I think some of those technological advances themselves might be enough to spur us into an RBE if all else fails. Because once you remove the cycle of violence from our species' existence, suddenly our appreciation of things is bound to dramatically change. Anyways, I thought that was a trippy thought. If you'd like to talk on that a little bit, I would be enthused.
Yeah, I wouldn't really consider this eating as an inherently violent act. Really, I just guess I just see it as, you know, a thing that, you know, humans and other living beings do. In terms of things like the food chain and stuff like that, some animals, they eat other animals because it's necessary, because they've evolved, because they've evolved that way. Their digestive systems are literally geared towards carnivorous diets.
So I find that fascinating. Are you saying that carnivores are not violent because... I mean, that to me is such an interesting, like, metaphysical argument that it's their nature, it's their requirement to live, so it's not inherently violent because that's just what they have to do.
I'm not saying it's not violent. I'm just saying it's necessary for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, you continue.
Well, do you think that cutting down a tree is a violent act? And if not, why not? I'm not saying it is, by the way. I'm just these are some interesting philosophical and metaphysical questions that I think that are fun to play with.
Well, it's very subjective. Are you, like, chopping down, like, an ecologically important rainforest, or are you, you know, having some, or is it some sustainable enclosed, you know, timber farm that's not going to affect the the surrounding ecology.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between the two.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I grant that.
Yeah.
So you don't think it's violent to chop down a living tree then? Right? Like, I mean, it doesn't have a central nervous system, sure. But the tree on some very basic level is probably aware of what's happening to it. Like, it doesn't have a thought like, oh no, I'm getting chopped down or anything, but it is a living organism, right? And I guess this then goes to the point of what constitutes violence. Can violence only be waged against things which are sentient, maybe?
Well, I guess. I mean, we okay. This is some point that a lot of futurists and a lot of sci-fi enthusiasts compared to when they talk about things like the Fermi paradox and how some really advanced civilizations might end up killing us. Might end up killing us off, not because they want to, but because they're just completely unaware. Like they have this consumption habit, and they're just completely unaware that they're doing it. We probably by walking on some grass path, they probably step on some some anthill or something and be completely unaware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, that is interesting. I guess that comes back to like, how would we define violence? How would we define I guess morality and everything, really. The reason I bring this up is because I feel like these philosophical questions about ethics and morality and everything, obviously they relate directly to our discussion on how we should organize our society and how we should deal with criminality specifically. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the reason I bring it up is like, because people are pretty ecologically conscious, right? And there are people, and I myself am one of them, that thinks that we should preserve biodiversity, right? I would say that, yeah, like you were saying, maybe cutting down one tree isn't violent against an ecological system, but cutting down an entire forest probably is, because that's affecting many organisms. And then it comes down to like, is the reason that it's ethically or morally wrong is because it's impacting a system that we enjoy or that we depend on, or is it violent because we're impacting these other organisms, many of them sentient? So that's kind of one thing that I wanted to get at. Like, what's animal rights in an RBE look like? And I hate the word right, because we're actually not talking about rights. We're talking about more of a science-based and logically derived approach to things like preservation, conservation, and criminality. But yeah, all very interesting topics.
I mean, if it's like if you have some hypothetical indoors enclosed lumber farm that's not any, it isn't a habitat of any animals or anything. It's just there primarily to fast grow trees to serve as wood production. In that kind of isolated system, I don't see anything wrong with chopping down the trees and making wood out of them.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, because I laid this trap for you. Okay, now I'm going to spring it. So, what about cows and stuff, though? Like, because we're talking about how unethical to, like, the current practices of harvesting meat. Well, in that sense, we have cows in these enclosures. It's not impacting the ecology outside of it. I mean, maybe their farts and other emissions are, but the act of killing the cow itself isn't, right? So why do you think that it's unethical or immoral, maybe, to slaughter these cows and treat them in this like industrial way, but it's not the same for trees? And I guess what I'm getting at is, does it come down to sentience? Because the cow can moo at you and look you in the eyes and plead for its life at some point just by looking at you and realizing that you're about to shoot it with like a bolt gun or something. Like,
yeah, essentially, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sentience is definitely a part of your ethics or moral perspective, and I would definitely agree with that. I would go further. I do think that it is violent to chop down a tree. Right. I'm not saying that it's unjustifiable. I'm not saying that it's just as violent as, say, chopping down a person. But I think that like the only way that we can actually justify these acts of like destroying other living organisms is simply because we have to rely upon them now. They are part of our resource pool.
Yeah. Well, the whole concept of industry is violent, but it can be justified. It can be ethical and sustainable. It's just, it is violent, but it's not violent in the way that is massively important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is interesting. Like. My brain right now wants to like pick into every little thing, but I understand we probably should return to talking about criminality and not just the philosophical underpinnings. But thank you for humoring me on that little tangent, because I love things like that. I love playing with those sorts of ideas and perspectives and everything. So anyways, yeah, we could return to talking about criminality, which I feel like we covered many of the points already that we wanted to. If we want to, we could talk about quality of life or living standards next, or I'll leave it up to you.
Maybe, well, if you want to talk about individual issues within criminality, or did you want to go straight to the next topic?
Well, I mean, it's whatever. I know for you, it's kind of late in the night at this point, so it just depends on what your energy levels are and whether you have the interest in it in the moment. I'm fine with talking about whatever. I'm having a great time. It's only like 5:30 for me, so I'm totally good to go.
Yeah. So yes, again, so if you don't have a system of law for all these issues, then in place of that you have to have a set of solutions for each individual act, as it were. I haven't read any of the Ian Banks books, but apparently there's in these books there's a it's quite a humorous solution. There's something called a slap bot, where the basically if you that literally prevents you from like if you go to strike someone with like a knife or something, it literally prevents you from hurting anyone.
I see.
And
okay.
I think that's kind of a funny thing. We in the far future that may be the case. I don't know, but where we need either to have a solution in place for each individual issue, or we need to make it so that like certain issues are no longer a problem. A rather benign example is say cannabis use. it's it's becoming legal in many areas of the world, but before it's like, oh, it's this big issue, and it's literally, the solution is literally to just legalize it, and then you just take all of the power away from black markets and so forth. And yeah, I mean, even without the existence of money, there's no there's literally no incentive to street drug deal in a moneyless society. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so we talked about these ways of reducing crime greatly. I think one thing that we could discuss is how to prevent it, and I think we touched on this very briefly at the end of our first stream, which is social cohesion, right? Community, building up social capital, social trust, whatever you want to call it, in order to make sure that people are paying attention to each other and are attentive to each other's wants and needs, so that we prevent a lot of crimes of passion, or we can prevent a lot of petty crimes, like teenagers doing stupid things. Like when I was a teenager, for instance, I broke into my school. I didn't steal anything. I didn't damage any property, but I trespassed onto the property at night because it was a fun thing to do, or run around. I don't know. I was an idiot. I was 16, so but people do dumb things sometimes, right? And I have to say that if we were living in a society that was more attentive to our entire population, if people were more in tune with each other's perspectives and wants, and more open and everything, if we had greater cohesion, greater understanding, we probably would nip a lot more crime in the bud, because you wouldn't give people time alone in order to fester over something and decide to go lash out in whatever way they see fit.
Yeah, and a lot of petty stuff isn't really crime worthy.
Yeah,
so in the community type society, it's a lot of silly stuff. Trespassing somewhere would without any intent of harming anyone or damaging anything, just fooling around wouldn't really be. That's not something I would consider crime, really.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting. Criminality, or crime itself today, it's definitely well, what's the word? Gosh, I just had it and now I forgot it. I always remember the word lethologica whenever I have a word slip my mind. I don't know if I mentioned that to you in the past, but lethologica is the definition of lethologica is it's the experience of when you forget a word. You're like, that slipped my mind. So it's so funny. I always I'll randomly forget a word, but I'll immediately remember lethologica. It just jumps right in there. It's God damn you, lethologica. It's so interesting. I don't know. The human mind, fascinating, brilliant, amazing, wonderful. It's definitely arbitrary. That's the word I was looking for. So a lot of crimes, that we punish and everything, it's sometimes they don't make any sense at all. I mean, that's why we have so many antiquated laws on the books that are still technically laws but are not enforced, and some of them are unenforceable. I've seen there's some silly laws where you're not allowed to wear this color on a Sunday or something like that. In some weird off-grid jurisdiction or something like that. Yeah, and in one of the towns that I live next to, it's actually illegal to stack horse manure higher than 5 feet on a sidewalk.
Yeah.
Just what? It just doesn't even make any sense to us anymore because horses they're kind of a novelty again. You know, they're kind of rare. Not something that everybody's using, and you're not hauling around like cubic yards of manure. You know, so yeah. Yeah. Like I was saying, a lot of laws are definitely arbitrary now, and I think that if we looked at things systemically, if we looked at things more critically, then we could probably come up with definitely some organizations of our society that would preclude the need for these things called laws. Because in a lot of times they're just like completely unfair, and then you have the entire judicial system, not the legislative, the criminal system, you know, that people have to go through, or the civil system that people have to go through and like pay penalties or serve time or whatever else it is that they end up having to do. And a lot of the time, I would say a good number of these decisions made in court are like immoral, you know, themselves. You know, like sure you're enforcing a law, but the law itself is not moral. But that's the law, you know. So that's what I'm saying. We should definitely apply critical thinking and systemic thinking to how we appraise our the criminality or the criminal elements which exist within our society. Because let's get one thing out of the way: like crime is never gonna go completely away. Like that's just reality, you know.
Although
I mean, maybe
although in a community type system, it would be a tiny shadow of what we have now.
Yeah, well, you definitely wouldn't be having like mass murders every week in the United States anymore.
Yeah. There's also how would we handle firearms and stuff like that in this type of system, but that's also something to discuss. What I was actually going to say is about when you said talked about the court system. In this community type society, we could still have, say, this court, but it's not like a criminal court. It's just like just literally some place where people can come in and solve like civil disputes, and they can just make a decision on something.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different organizations that we could explore. I think that this is a good introduction to this conversation, like all the things we've covered so far. It's a good way to get people thinking about these things, because a lot of people just take things for granted. And not just when it comes to criminality, but when it comes to everything, you know. People just tend to assume that things have always kind of been the way that they are, or they change very incrementally, or some things are just not possible. And so it's good to broaden people's horizons and make them really consider how they perceive things, and also consider, more importantly, what is possible. And so I think that's pretty good. I think on my end, I think I've touched on everything that I wanted to for now when it comes to criminality.
Yeah.
But you did bring up guns, so if you want to go into discussing that, we can touch on that. I mean, that's not a controversial topic, is it? I mean, nobody cares about guns, right?
Well, this is something I do admit is going to be difficult. I mean, you couldn't. I mean, people 3D print the things now, don't they? I mean, really, the only thing you can really do is to disincentivize people from using guns on each other, essentially.
Yeah. Which, I mean, in many cases, a lot of gun crime is caused by many of the same things that we've already touched on: poverty,
Yeah.
injustice or discrimination, deprivation of many sorts. A lot of it can be caused just by the way that people are treated, and whether or not they even have a society that cares about them, right? So, I mean, many of the things that we're talking about changing, or I would say improving upon, really, because we're not asking to depart completely from the way that we're doing things now. We're just asking to take our experiences from the way that we've been doing things for a long time and to learn from them, and to maybe incorporate that knowledge and move forward to something that's more efficacious, right? And yeah, so when it comes to guns, I don't really, personally, I don't have a problem with guns. I think that, you know, in the past, people didn't really do the whole mass shooting thing near as much. I think that really, when it comes down to it, we have serious social issues, and the symptom of these serious and growing issues is that, like, the result of it is these sorts of violent acts that we're seeing. But I mean, people have been using guns to hunt and for protection and stuff like that for centuries now. And I think that now that we're seeing rises in gun violence, I don't think it's because it's easier now to get guns than ever before. I mean, in fact, now it's harder to get a lot of types of guns. I think that that really we have to solve a lot of these other social issues, and that'll naturally really de-escalate the situation. And a lot of people, if they didn't feel threatened, then they wouldn't be buying guns for self-defense. Like I said, I don't have anything against guns. Like, you're right, we need to find ways in order to just get people to not really be investing so much. Sorry, I cut out there for a minute because my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So guns is a tricky thing. Like I said, people use them for hunting. They use them for self-defense, and those in the modern world are still very justifiable uses of guns as weapons, or as tools. So
and again, like, now you don't even have to buy them now with things like metal 3D printing technology becoming more accessible. Now, you know, people can basically 3D print their own firearms.
Yeah. And in the future, they'll be able to print far more dangerous objects than just guns, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, right now, somebody could go and collect common householding cleaning products and create a noxious gas and kill hundreds of people. You know, that's possible. I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure somebody out there does and has considered it. But for some reason, they choose a gun instead. And I think that has a lot to do with the act of shooting somebody and taking their life in that way in particular. And like, people have brought up in some circles the fact that it's kind of like one of those social phenomenons, right? Like, where people start doing it. Like, there's like been suicide epidemics in the past where there's like a trend starts of people committing suicide, and then all sorts of people start committing suicide doing the same thing, like hanging themselves or jumping off bridges or whatever it is. There's like the suicide forest in Japan. So like, I think that, yeah, to an extent, there's some sort of social phenomenon going on that is giving rise to the use of guns in particular as a tool for destruction of other people's lives. And we probably just honestly need to listen to people and find out ways to take care of them so they no longer feel like they have to kill other people in order to be heard or in order to enact some sort of change, you know?
And since we're on that topic, just another thing, just to offhand address. An RBE and this new type of society will just... This new type of system will just immediately cut suicide. Just immediately.
Yeah.
Because of because just the social and the economical benefits, it just superior for people's mental health, and we'll see suicide decline as a result.
Stress would decrease immensely. Immensely. And I think that this actually is a good point to transition into our discussion on changes to quality of life.
Yes.
Because the reduction of stress is definitely a vast improvement to an individual or a society's quality of life. And to continue on that path, I think, you know, if we reorganized our economy today, we could have people working 20-hour weeks like tomorrow. Like, that's totally possible. If we reduced or removed a lot of redundancies, it could happen very quickly.
Yeah,
very quickly.
Even still within capitalism.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were studies and there were some plans that were being considered years ago at this point, where they were considering the 25-hour work week. And they would just pay people more to do the same work, but they would greatly reduce unemployment, and it would also obviously improve everybody's life. And decades ago, American futurists were talking about the 20-hour work week or the 5-hour work week, or not even having to work at all, right? And so the RBE is basically looking at the situation and saying, we don't need people flipping burgers all the time for other people. We don't need people sitting in tall office buildings and moving money or shuffling papers. We don't need to mass produce ultimately pretty useless items for people to consume. Like, all of these changes could be made very quickly, and it would very dramatically change the ways in which people function in society. The types of work that would be available to do would be much more meaningful, and that in and of itself would also improve people's lives. Because I don't know about you, but I actually like to work. I like to have a job. I like to be productive. But I hate work where what I'm doing isn't meaningful at all. I hate doing that. That kills me inside. But when I'm doing something that actually has an impact, something that's positive and beneficial to society, I love that. I wouldn't mind doing that 25 hours a week. I kind of mind doing it 40 hours a week because, well, I mean, an 8-hour day is just a long day to spend in my life. It's spent sitting or standing in front of a computer reading and typing the entire day. 8 hours is a long time to be doing that, but you know, I digress.
What was I talking about before you started speaking?
Before I interrupted you?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So instead of all that, you know, you could have like, I mean, there's already chef robots, like automated chefs that can just like cook meals and stuff like that. You it's not much of an engineering feat to have some robot with a spatula arm attached to it that just flips burgers.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And let's see, like, you know, moving stuff around in warehouses, cashiers. In fact, grocery stores in and of themselves are antiquated. Like, like
Well,
so many
well,
things in our society.
we wouldn't even need automated cashiers because there wouldn't be no there'd be no checkout.
Hmm.
You know.
Yeah, no, yeah. You would go and get
Yeah.
some food that you needed and then
Yeah.
go home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Imagine that. Imagine not a bunch of useless shit. Like a money-free world is a world in which there's so much less shit to deal with. Like no taxes. Imagine how much time you would have on your hand. You don't have to count money. You don't have to budget. You don't have to do your taxes. You don't have to plan ahead months or years even. You don't have to plan for retirement. All of those accounting tasks are superfluous.
And
Yeah.
and they're all sort of calculated. I talk about a lot about a decentralized system. You could literally have an algorithm for each that just for everything that just focuses on one particular thing. So you could have an algorithm that literally focuses on the distribution of one type of vegetable in one area of the world. For example. And then you could have like all different algorithms that complete each individual task. And that would make up collectively a resource management system.
Absolutely. So, I mean, the things that... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
It doesn't take some immense, super advanced AI to do this thing. You had Project Cybersyn in the 70s that's already being tested, and with their computational power, they could already do economic calculation.
Yeah.
Imagine what we could do today.
Exactly. Yeah. And so all of these things that we've just been discussing improve dramatically people's quality of life. We could double or triple the amount of free time that people have. And that means that they could actually pursue the intellectual curiosities that they have. They could pursue art. They would have time to work out. They would have time to spend with family and friends and to travel. That's another thing that we should touch on. Travel. Like,
yes.
God.
You just literally, because of the principle of access, you literally, there's no such thing. There wouldn't be, because I imagine every residential facility as kind of acting like a free hotel, but scaled up to to something much bigger and something a little more long term. So you could so you could have literally a decent sized living space that's. And I talked about this in my civic design video. Literally have a living space that you customize to your liking, and then you could have like your preferences for how you like your living space to be saved onto the cloud, and then when you travel from say Northern Europe to South America, you could have your preferences transmitted, and by the time and whilst you are like traveling all across the world on an intercontinental maglev train, your new space for when you travel is being prepared for you.
Yeah.
Preferably autonomously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's really quite cool. And because we wouldn't have a bunch of people sitting in their own cars and having to maintain all of them and everything individually, we would have dramatically improved public transit systems. Like, when normally when people think of public transit, they think like, oh, that's terrible. Like they generally think public transit terrible, or that's a poor person thing. But people don't realize that even 100 years ago, we had in the United States is what I'm most familiar with. But in the United States, we had these incredible projects like high-speed rails and light rail and other forms of transportation that are highly efficient that we could invest good resources in, that would be comfortable, that wouldn't be overcrowded, that would always run on a good schedule. I mean, like the amounts of improvements, the types of improvements that we could make would greatly improve people's lives. It would also save a lot of lives, because if you don't have everyone or a good portion of people within these countries driving all over the place, you no longer have people looking down for a second because they spilled their coffee and slamming into the back of somebody's car and killing themselves or somebody else. Like that wouldn't be a reality anymore, or at least nowhere near the level it is now. So
a lot of lives would be saved, and that just has the knock-on effect of taking pressure off of the healthcare system as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you get rid of like financial crimes, oh my god, like identity theft would no longer be a thing. Like overnight, no identity theft, because what are you going to get if you steal somebody's identity?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Going back to public transit, a lot one hang up some people have with public transit is privacy. Well, you could just on a train or something, you could literally have instead of having it be suited for, to jam people into, one train, you could have have one carriage be just an array of these enclosed private, like, cubicle type spaces that people could just have their own privacy while it's still a public transit system.
Absolutely. And if we invested a fraction of the amount of money that we invest in the current infrastructure, we could have fully automated high-speed rails that operate off of sustainably harvested electricity, and they never have to stop. Like what they're planning in China right now, a high-speed rail that never stops. It uses magnetic cars to detach and attach and to get up to speed as it's going along. And if you had it fully automated, you could have several of those going all over the place. Like at any one time, on a loop, you could have several of them, traveling equidistantly, and that way you keep tight schedules. Everybody's getting around at reasonable amounts of time, and once again, you're alleviating overcrowding. Because if you look at a train and you're like, there's more people getting on that one that I want, I'll just get on the next, right? Like, I mean, that, and there's no rush, because you're not going to get fired from your job if you show up a little bit late, especially if your workday is 4 hours long.
Well, if you're, I kind of disagree with the very notion of a job that might be at work. You might be working with people. You might be working with people, but it wouldn't be like a job. It'd just be like commons cooperative. Collaborative commons. You're just working with some collaborative organization to make something or to provide something.
That being said, I still think that you could lose a form of employment. Like if you're responsible for something and you're routinely negligent, I think that would be a reason for society to kind of say, hey, we don't want you doing this anymore. We would prefer somebody that is actually interested in this position. And that would come with no penalties. That would just mean that you need to find something that maybe you actually want to do. And It's that simple, right? Like there's so many changes that happen just when we begin to organize our society
Just
to be more equitable.
yeah, just go. This is the last point I'm going to make on transport, because it's just a big topic.
Mm-hmm.
Roads. I know it's kind of a meme about like how. I know it's kind of a meme about how ANCAPs hate roads. I don't really like them either. Roads take up so much land. It's unbelievable. They could just so much land that could be used for other uses.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we had a public an excellent public transit system, and also made our city systems walkable and cyclable and stuff like that, we would just save so much land from just not building roads that people drive their cars on.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge savings in resources when we reorganize things in order to be sustainable, but also to catch up to where our technology is currently. Because all of the changes that we're talking about could happen over a very short span of time. 5 or 10 years, we could have almost all of these things fully implemented, if not all of them.
Yeah.
And because we're simply at this point in time, I mean, our society is not taking advantage of the full breadth of technological innovations that we have access to. And the reason that we're not is because they're not as profitable as current industries. And some of them aren't profitable. And so they're very useful for people. But because they're not something that you would make money on, there's absolutely no interest. There's no incentive, I should say, for creating those things. Right?
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah.
Look at the I mean, well, I guess I was growing up at the time that the standard was being phased out. But you look at the VHS and the Betamax. Betamax was objectively better in many ways, but VHS was more profitable.
Mm-hmm.
Had more market share. Betamax was phased out, and the VHS became dominant. And that's just an example of how, in our current system, what's profitable will generally be more successful than what is actually useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, holy hell, like, the fact that DVDs and CDs are still sold to this day is a tragedy. It's a travesty, you know? The fact that we have, like, so many redundancies, like, you have cell phones and pads and, like, laptops and PCs and these other devices that exist, and you could have only a couple devices that would perform all those tasks.
Yeah, I mean,
right? And that's not. Yeah, you could customize those. Yeah. I'm not saying they would all look the same. It's just we could reduce redundancies and inefficiencies and benefit from it.
I mean, I know it's I know it's just some capitalist gimmick, but hey, you got the new folding phones that once it's a phone you could fold it out into a tablet.
Mm-hmm.
That's something decent that Samsung's done.
Yeah. No, and I mean, there's like, you've heard of like the paper thin like LCD screens or whatever. I don't think they're LCD. There's some sort of paper thin screen that you could just roll up into a scroll and carry around with you. And they're like designing flexible like transistors and stuff, like flexible processors, so you can just roll up your computer and take it anywhere with you. Like, I mean, Why would you need a phone and a cell, or I mean, not a cell phone, a phone and a laptop and that and a PC and a pad and all these other things? Like, it's so ridiculous. And once again, I'm not saying that like these sorts of decisions would remove choice from the equation. In fact, it would give us more practicable choices, and practical choices to make.
Especially with like modular design and stuff like that, increasing sustainability, increasing customizability, increasing
and freeing up a massive amount of resources to do other really cool things.
Yeah, and just because it increases longevity as well. If you design for disassembly, design for future upgrade. For future upgrading, I think is the way forward, and if you complement that with a circular economy, you could keep on innovating and building these new parts without replacing everyone's new unit of a device year on year on year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's so many qualitative changes that we could make that people would like not really notice, but it would still save us so much time, so many resources, so much effort making these items that are just designed for a consumer economy. And I mean, it's amazing. If we're greatly reducing the amount of plastics and rubbers and stuff that we're putting out as wrappers and everything, then we will have less pollution in our environment. That improves people's lives. When we no longer are incentivizing the destruction of the rainforest just so people can plant crops to sell on a global market, then we're preserving biodiversity. And
some people like to trash on vertical farms, or like it's energy intensive. Why don't you just produce more energy using clean renewable sources? If less than 1% of the world's surface covered in solar cells could provide multiple times the current energy demand in supply of energy, just from that source alone. You've got over 70 terawatts of untapped wind energy, geothermal energy,
wave energy,
tidal. There's of course, it's always 30 years away, but we're getting closer and closer to nuclear fusion. Thorium is an option. When you combine all of these, we're all on our way to becoming a Type 1 civilization. If you've heard of the Kardashev scale.
Oh yeah, absolutely, of course.
Energy, as laughable as it sounds, with with our current technological capacity, assuming we get off fossil fuels, energy just isn't an issue. You could even use carbon neutral fuels like ethanol or just pure hydrogen. And
that's the thing too, is like when we're talking about increasing our use of energy in certain ways, we're also talking about removing like these massive redundancies that we were talking about before, which would free up massive amounts of resources. So we wouldn't have to burn any more resources, actually. We would be burning far fewer when it comes to fossil fuels, because immediately we would no longer be sustaining this entirely superfluous system.
Yeah. And we would be by cutting back on these resources, and also by thinking about how we can reuse all of our resources, how we can create a circular system, we would drastically increase our resource pool, and that is all part of stepping away from of transitioning from scarcity economy to an abundance economy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh man, now my brain is going all over the place. Like there's so many cool things that we've touched on. And there's so much more that we could touch on. Like that's really what draws me to the RBE, is that it's really a consideration of the potential of our species, right? So like there's so many different things to think about, and honestly, like we just need so many more people thinking about these things. So many people today are employed in trying to develop marketable products. What if instead of that, they were employed trying to find ways to better our society? I mean, it's insane. Like the quality of life that we enjoy today would improve so dramatically. And that's why it makes me laugh when I talk to some capitalists and they're just like, trying to tell me that what I'm asking is for people's quality of life to be reduced because we want to conserve resources. It's like, no, if we just organized reasonably or rationally, like our quality of life would only go up dramatically and things would be almost immediately sustainable too. Like what's the downside?
Yeah, and it's just something like, something congruent with that is just how ridiculous it is that we have water scarcity in some places. The Earth's surface is literally covered in 70% saline. You just desalinate it and you give everyone a potable water supply. It's not that hard.
Yeah, and when you have an incredible amount of energy. Yeah, I mean, the biggest argument against desalinization right now is that it's energy intensive. But when you have an incredible amount of energy and nothing to do with it, you can desalinate as much water as you freaking want.
Yeah.
You know? Like, like we can immediately solve so many issues. And of course, we could go over some rebuttals to these types of organization. Like some people say, well, how do you incentivize people to do the dirty jobs? And some people say, we can start with that one.
Well, yeah, just we don't do the jobs. Our robot minions will do all of that.
That's violent, Adam.
No.
Those machines are people too. I'm just.
No, but yeah. I mean, we could go to the whole our AI people and stuff like that. But these robots, I wouldn't really consider them AI. They'd just be. Like,
I was just playing around.
You just have all different automatons completing different tasks, like one flips burgers, one collects the trash, one transports the trash to the recycling center, one delivers goods to people, and drones monitor the ecosystem or assess resource deposits or what have you. Yeah.
I mean, and also another point that I want to raise, it's like during that period that we dubbed the transition to an RBE, some dirty jobs would have to be done by hand. But here's the thing. Yeah. Sometimes the toilet backs up. Do you refuse to plunge it because that's a little icky? No. You take care of your shit, literally. You go in there and you take care of it. Because you know what? You don't want your house to smell like a giant dookie. So, I mean, it's kind of the same deal, right? Like, we live in a society. Like, we're supposed to have cohesion.
The meme, we live in a society.
That's exactly why I said it. Like, it's funny, but it's also kind of true. Like, right now we live in this weird schizophrenic society. We could live in a society that makes sense.
Modern problems require modern solutions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you right now, if I have to spend 2 hours in a sewer one week because like something backed up. I mean, if it means that like people aren't gonna have to deal with that, I mean, I'll do it. I'll volunteer to do something like that. Like when a house catches on fire, people volunteer to get the people out and to put out the fire, right? Like it's just you do things to take care of the people around you. That's what a society is supposed to be. So when people are like, how are you supposed to incentivize dirty jobs? It's like, well, but there isn't going to be jobs, right? There isn't going to be career plumbers, or at least not as many of them anymore, not by necessity of the economic system.
That's another thing. Fires, you just literally give everyone just 2 fire extinguishers to each home. 1 for water, 1 for CO2.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or some other gas that like you can use to extinguish electrical fires.
Mm-hmm. And build things out of materials that don't easily. You know, and I mean, yeah. There's so many practical innovations that could be made if we weren't focusing on a profit instead of actual sustainable development, right? And I mean, it's just that simple, folks. Why are we still doing this? Why are we dealing with this system that just doesn't make any sense? I get a lot of people are afraid to switch things up because there's a bit of uncertainty. Well, you know what? That's life, kind of.
And
right?
Compared to I don't know if you've seen the article, compared to this society where the richest man on earth cuts medical benefits for one of his stores because it would save him the amount he earns in 6 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so lost in thought right now. There's so many things to think about. I just get so excited on this topic. I don't know why I haven't been making videos. I think I'm just a little burnt out on doing my own thing. If I had people to like hang out with and like make videos together, I think I would make a lot more. I really love this topic though. I have so much fun with it. This concept, the entire RBE. I mean, what we should try to do is next time we should try to get Travis Grant or one of these other
yes.
We should definitely shoot for that. I know he's out there. I know he might have seen our first episode.
Yeah, I think he did.
That little stalker. We got to get him in here.
Yeah, but something that just reminded me about talking about quality of life. And this kind of comes in tandem with a little bit with social cohesion and other topics we've discussed. Is we've been talking a lot about the physical side of quality of life, haven't we? During this stream, well, there's also a social side to quality of life in terms of socialization, and relation, like taking more time to find relationships, whether they be platonic, romantic, sexual, or otherwise.
You
know.
Yeah.
That would be, and we could, as I've talked about in videos, we could, have create structures where people are incentivized to be more pro-social and want to interact with other people, and maybe that could spur friendships or relationships or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And less people would be lonely, and you'd actually see a reduction in things like sex crime.
Yeah.
I'd imagine.
Well, yeah, and you know what? I wanted to say that, like, because porn is a really interesting topic, right? Like,
Yeah.
when porn was introduced, crime dropped dramatically. When prostitution is entered into like some economies, crime drops precipitously. It's kind of a funny thing. It's almost like people have needs that aren't being realized and can't be fully realized by the current system because
Yeah.
it can be very exclusionary,
Yeah,
right? And or denigrating.
because it's not recognized. We are emotional beings. We are social beings. We
Mhm.
are innately sexual beings, and we have those needs. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and to that point though, like I do think that if somebody like ends up being economically forced into prostitution because they have no other alternatives, I think that's a kind of systemic violence.
Yeah.
Same thing with porn, right? I mean, it's not exactly the same, but like if somebody finds themselves in a situation where porn is like one of the few ways out and probably the least painful or boring way out, and they do that's kind of a systemic form of violence. I don't think sex is a bad thing, and I know there are porn stars, that like there's that one woman, I forget her name now, who was talked about for quite a while. Like she has a doctorate's degree,
Mm-hmm.
and she's like well off. She just does porn because she really enjoys having sex. Like that's totally cool. Like I mean, if that's what you like to do, if you're an exhibitionist and you like having different partners, like go for it. Like I think that's super cool. But the
And
way that
yeah,
our
yeah.
system is set up now, like a lot of people end up having to make these decisions that in other circumstances they probably wouldn't make. And
Mm.
I think that that is a form of systemic violence.
Yes, but in a moneyless economy where it where it's not coerced, or where it's not something that's deemed necessary to achieve survival or what have you.
Hmm.
I think it just could just be used as a form of freedom of expression,
Yeah,
essentially.
absolutely. Yeah. So we just had Millennial join us. Unfortunately, Millennial does not have a microphone, but hello, dear friend.
Yeah.
We were just talking about porn and prostitution.
Yeah.
These are very
Uh,
intrinsic concepts related to the RBE, obviously.
no, but it's still important to discuss because uh, well, what started this is how what started this conversation was how in an RBE, since we have all these different types of needs, not just physiological needs, but emotional needs, social needs, sexual needs, and stuff like that. And
Hmm.
that they would be, we would find ways to create structures that take care of all of that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, once again, like if somebody enjoys um, having sex with strangers, that has some level of social value. I don't think there's anything wrong with sex in the least. I'm a very sex positive person.
Oh, same,
Personally, I'm
same.
yeah, personally I'm monogamous oriented,
Mm-hmm.
and I am not interested in having a bunch of random partners. I mean, that's just not me. But I also recognize that I went through different stages when I was,
Mm-hmm.
especially when I was a younger person,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's totally natural and fine. I think
Yeah.
that prostitution, like I said before, prostitution can just by itself dramatically lower crime in an area.
Mm.
So obviously, there is some social utility to people going out and committing these sexual acts with strangers. I mean, whatever. I mean, that might be controversial or really upsetting to some people. I make no apologies. We are sexual beings, like you said.
Mm. Yeah. Another way to alleviate this kind of scarcity of these kinds of interactions, and also that some people face, is through people are becoming. We're starting to see the inklings of more people being open to polyamorous relationships, and I think that for some people that could be that could be an avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as we're removing these vertically hierarchical economic structures, we're greatly reducing power dynamics, right? Immediately.
I mean, we've already taken care of at least in the Western world, most of the religious conceptions of sexuality. No one really cares about oh, you're doing this certain thing, you need Jesus, or no one really says that anymore. At least if you're not, if you don't live in the deep south of the US. Yeah. But I digress.
Well, so now we've covered all. Apparently, people are just going to be having lots more free sex in the RBE. I mean, come on, guys! Like that. Yeah. That's definitely an increase in the standard of living. So, we've covered a broad variety of topics today, or subtopics within these larger topics that we wanted to at least touch on. I think that. If you are okay with ending the stream here, I am. If there's anything else that you'd like to discuss, I feel like we've put out enough material to spark a pretty decent conversation, or at least thoughts in people's minds. Mm-hmm. So
next time, an interesting topic I'd like to discuss is topics of education and upbringing.
Okay.
Do you think that's an interesting topic that you would like to discuss?
Certainly. Yeah. No, there are important changes that would occur there too, just by the ways that we would reorganize our economy, and we can talk about those, and then also discuss how to reshape our society and produce some very interesting results in those two areas. So that would definitely be really good to cover. And like I said, if we could invite other individuals that might be willing to speak on some of these things, like our dear friend Travis Grant, or other individuals interested in talking on these topics, that'd be great, because I love your voice. I definitely love to hear my own voice, but it would be cool to have other individuals joining us and offering their perspectives. And yeah.
In a way, it's nearly 2:30.
Yep.
Where I am right now. So yeah, I will be uploading my next video probably by the end of next week now. I mean, I uploaded a short video yesterday, and then we have this stream now.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to download and then streams on my channel, and I think I'm also working on actually finishing up the race realism series, so I might record and release the first part of the second chapter of the alternative hypothesis debunked tonight. So things are happening, folks.
Just something I'd like to note is that I just think that over the course of these next few months, we really need to prepare ourselves for the decade ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I really think that we should try to make the 20s definitely a significant time for us as proponents. Maybe even make it have a goal of having some transition during the next decade, possibly.
Yeah, I think we should make it big. We should just go for it, right? I feel like there's a huge vacuum in the RBE movement right now, and I feel like there's still a lot of potential for energy and for people to get involved, but I feel like it's just not really being harvested right now, and so people need to step in and step up. And yeah, we should definitely start actualizing our activism.
Yeah. It. I mean, I'll mention this. It's already mentioned in my new video, but I now have a blog that I will post a link to in my next video. I'm basically just going to post there my progress of stuff I'm doing on my YouTube channel, and also other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and also maybe too, because you can pretty easily monetize the blogs. It can be a good revenue stream for any projects that I want to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that it would be good to begin thinking about ways of improving like production value, and also finding ways of just overall increasing our visibility. So
Yeah. And also it just, we live in a monetary system. We need the monetary means. I'm thinking of ways to, on top of my job, find ways of earning passive income to raise funding for any kind of startup things I want to do. I've started I'm interested in investing. Now there's quite a few apps where you can just plug all your details in and just start investing. That they have quite a good score on Trustpilot, so I trust them.
Yeah. Well, all of these things and much more to come shortly, everyone.
Yes.
Adam, have a wonderful night. It's late. Get some sleep.
Yeah.
I'm going to go do something with myself. We'll see what happens. That sounded really ominous or something. I'm going to try to work on a video. All right, I'm done.
Okay.
I'm delusional. I'm delirious. Whatever.
Okay.
All those things.
All right. I'll catch you guys later. See you later, Nathaniel. And
Adios.
Adios. Peace. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.